unified command. Implementing that process is something that is a challenge. It's not done. It takes something where there's no egos, and you have to have people that can work together. So again, thinking back through your career, there's probably some people that wouldn't be very good at it, but there's probably some people you've dealt with that'd be extremely good at it. So unified command, what's the time, or what's the range of you would use it? Why would you use it? And we'll talk a little more in depth here in a minute, but several political and functional agencies, if you're working multi-agencies with the response, there's a difference. We'll talk about RAE, the concept of responsibility, expertise, or authority and expertise. We'll talk about that in a little bit to kind of help identify that. But in unified command, too, multiple agencies within a jurisdiction. Nowadays, we pull, and we may have law enforcement, we have EMS, we may have a coroner, we may have fire department, we may have other entities involved, maybe a toast, whatever those things may be. So there may be multiple agencies within the same jurisdiction that all have authority, but we have to work through unified command to make that an efficient, smooth operating process. And I'll define how unified command is done a little more in depth. And then maybe more than one political jurisdiction. Maybe it's county to county, maybe it's city to city, department to department, that type thing, a little bit larger response in a larger geographical area. So some different concepts of unified command. So when unified command was taught throughout Illinois in the hazmat instructor program, a gentleman named Raymond Kay was one of the first to use this concept in Illinois for hazmat. Some of you on here may know Raymond or may have had interaction with him in the past. He did a lot of education and teaching and was good at what he did. So you heard me mention that responsibility, authority, and expertise is a concept we use in unified command. So you have to boil that down. So let's say we have and I'm just going to use this as an example. Let's say we have a two-car collision on an Illinois route somewhere. It's a head-on collision, and there's a lot of issue with it. A little bit of hazardous material with a fuel spill. If there wasn't a fire, there could be the coroner involved. There could be EMS involved. There may be IDOT involved. There's a lot of different entities or agencies that could be involved. So who has a responsibility to be there in a response like that? It very well could be all of them have the responsibility. Who has the authority to be there? It could very well be all of them have the authority because it is the roadway that they all share within their jurisdiction. And who has the expertise? When we look at that, we say, okay, at that moment in time, who has the expertise for what we're dealing with? So when you first pull up and you have something going on and you have a rescue situation or you have to do cutouts and different things like that, and you're assessing the situation, more than likely fire is going to pull up and establish command, and they're going to have that process. But as this evolves, if it's a longer process, maybe there's people that have to be transported off site. If it was a larger vehicle, maybe a bus with multiple people. Now you're talking transportation and EMS and evacuation and staging. So now you may have multiple entities having to work together. So who has the responsibility, who has the authority, and who has the expertise? And we'll define expertise a little bit more here. So to be part of unified command, you have to be able to make decisions without calling a superior. Many times we see people sent over to fill that role. I've been on scenes where off doing what the commander does and then send somebody of a lower level over to work with you in the unified command because they don't want to be there. They want to be able to walk around and do the things that they like to do. Sounds good in theory. The problem is that person that's representing your agency and department has to be able to deploy resources and funds. Now, when it comes to funds, hopefully most of you, if not all of you, or if you haven't, you should have a process, whether it's a standard operating guide or if you work with your fire district board or whatever it is, to know what your guidelines are when it comes to spending funds and money and understand about deploying resources. Because if you're in there and that person's not able to make those decisions, it's going to be real hard for them to make a quick decision under a unified command process. And unified command, here's how I simply break it down and look at it. Unified command is bringing the people who have the responsibility, the authority, and the expertise, using RAE, together. So for a lot of the incidences we go to, that may be fire and that may be law enforcement. Typically, those are the two. If it's a roadway type thing, those are the two that have to work together because we're talking about closures, we're talking about different things. Just using it at a simple level. So who's in charge if it's a law enforcement and it's a fire department? Well, they both have responsibility. So they could share a unified command concept, which means you have two individual incident commanders on a scene. Those two are overseeing the operations, who's ever pulling that off on the end, and they form a unified command. In that unified command, what that really is a filtering process. You know, the jurisdiction that I've worked in for many years has a major interstate, Interstate 55 running through it. The Illinois State Police own Interstate 55. And if you don't believe me, just ask them. They believe they own Interstate 55. When it comes to moving traffic, they want it open, they want it moving through. That's their process, that's their protocols, that's their procedures, and that's fine. They're doing their job. Many times we want to shut it down for safety reasons. We want to do different things. Well, as a fire chief or somebody who's maybe a fire incident command, you don't want to go out and make the decision to shut the interstate down and 5 minutes later have somebody with a round brim hat in your face screaming at you, because you can't do that. So if you formed a unified command where the leader of the law enforcement, leader of the fire got together and discussed this under a unified command process, the law enforcement gets to express their viewpoints and their guidelines of what they have to follow. You get to express your concerns. You two filter that decision. You come to something that works for both parties. That's what unified command is. Filtering a decision amongst multiple single or double or more agencies, filtering that decision so it's educated, so everybody understands. Now, typically under unified command, you'll have an individual spokesperson. You know, maybe that still remains the fire chief, but you talk to the law enforcement, and law enforcement talks to you, fire department gets involved, and you have that discussion. Then when the fire chief comes out with the discussion, says this is what we're going to do and this is the direction and objective we're going to achieve here today, it's filtered. There won't be complications because that's the way that unified command works. And that can expand to much larger incident. You know, if you look at a railway incident, like we see on the screen, you know, it can expand out there too the same way. You may have multiple agencies involved in that. Same thing. Doesn't mean every agency that's on scene has a representative, but it does mean those that have the responsibility, authority, and expertise that should be involved in command work together, filter a decision, and send that decision out as a goal or objective to get the job done. And that makes it a good decision. You know, unified command is also not just everyone show up situation, and I just kind of identified that a little bit. In decision on response, strategy, resource deployment, or funding need to be made, either the liaison or the operations section chief constantly needs to consult somebody. So if you have somebody in command, you constantly have to make a phone call when you want to spend money, you want to make resource decisions, you want to make operational decisions, to say, hang on, I'm going to call so-and-so, or hang on, I'm going to radio so-and-so. What you need to do real quickly is get so-and-so in the command post. That person needs to be there. One of the other thing with command is command has to be identifiable on a scene, which may mean vest, may mean light, may mean whatever you use within your protocols and procedures. And the second thing is a unified command needs to be in a specific location and spot, not roaming the world. They need to be in one spot so anybody that needs them knows where to go. They're easily identifiable and easily get to them. So that is important in that process. And again, have the right people in there. If somebody's got to ask questions, that's not the right person. Ask them to get the right person in there. And quick decisions is really what that's all about. And again, I kind of said about the filtering process, you know, even though you may have a unified command, there's still one final buck stops here person within that organization. So let's say you have law enforcement, fire, and I'm going to say EMS as an example, those three working together. It's not management by committee. Everybody takes a vote and then the majority wins. If, let's say it's a rescue operation, the authority at that point to make the decisions to get the people free and get them out. Now they're going to, again, consult with law enforcement and EMS at the same time. And then law enforcement, fire department's going to make the final decision, make the final statement on how that's going to happen. Maybe that evolves over the time. You go back into a situation where everybody's rescued, they're out. Now it's really under the control of the law enforcement who's going to work with the record service to get everything cleaned up. Now, law enforcement may turn out to be that person, to be the spokesperson, and confer with fire. You know, let fire know, hey, we're going to need water suppression here as we do things. We're going to do different stuff, you know, and now law enforcement is in that. So it can be a rotating process in unified command. But whoever has the most responsibility, authority, and expertise at that given moment has to be the final buck stops person in that decision. Again, not a rule by committee process. Unified command.
You don't address if they call it a crime scene.
Okay, and again, if you have comments or something, just type it in the chat box for now, please, and we'll address more questions and things.
All right, I'm out.
Okay, so we try and adjust those things as we flow. Okay, hang on just 1 minute here.
All right, Greg. Yeah. I'm trying to mute.
Okay.
I'm trying to mute. Sorry about that. Um, I'm, I'm clicking on it. I'm trying to mute, and it's not giving me. So obviously you can still hear me, but I'm trying to mute this.
Yeah, I can't hear it. If you can just go ahead and work on what you have to do, and we'll just proceed on, and hopefully you can get that figured out. So
All right, sorry about that.
that's
So
fine. Stuff happens. Accidents happen. We get it.
uh, change audio connection. Well,
Okay. So again, if
disconnect audio connection. Will that
yeah,
work?
I'm not sure the mute button should work. If you're having troubles where it's not working, you may be able to exit out of the program and come back in, and that'll reset everything within the program. Sometimes technology does weird stuff, and that's all we can do. All right, so let's move on then. Again, unified command, and we're on slide 51 there. The unified command is something that's not frequently used a lot of the times. You know, when we have a small car accident, it's law enforcement and fire. A lot of times we don't need that. Fire chief does their thing, and the law enforcement cleans up the mess in the end. In Illinois, the need for unified command has been demonstrated in many areas. School violence. You know, some of you on here probably been involved in school violence. We have here locally. Thankfully, we never had any fatalities, which we're thankful for. But you know, those situations do arise where you're going to need a school administrator, you're going to need law enforcement, you're going to need fire rescue, and whoever else you may need in part of that command to be able to make those decisions. During a hazardous material response, that's something you know that safety is required, of course. But hazardous material response, you may need that. You may need somebody involved from the chemical or the driver itself involved in some of that process, or whoever's involved from the company to help you understand what it is you're dealing with and doing the things that you're doing. Uh, it could involve law enforcement again, it could involve fire, it could involve EMS, a lot of different things. Rapid evacuation situations, you know, where you have to do things and evacuate a community because of a hazardous material response, let's say. That's going to take a unified command, get good decisions to get through the process. Large industrial accidents, same concept. Large scale medical facility responses. You know, we've been through a situation where we've had bomb threat at a hospital and had to do a lot of different things and starting some evacuation, and we've had some fires and long-term care facilities, things of that nature in my career. So you're going to need a unified command to get through that. And of course, complicated rescue situations. When you're dealing with something that has a high loss, you know, that's something that's low frequency, doesn't happen very often, but it has a high end result, fatality or left. That can cause a major problem. So those are just some examples of when unified command could be utilized. And unified command is used, the members of the command team must agree on a common set of objectives. So, you know, when we talk about incident command, if you've taken any ICS classes, and especially got into the 2, 3, 400 program on those classes, you realize that you have to have a common set of objectives. You know, there can't be a different objectives for everybody that's involved in an organization or agency. You have to have one set of objectives or one goal, and it has to have common use of resource so you're efficiently using resources. You don't want two different groups calling ambulances. You want one group calling ambulances so you get the right amount of ambulances. You don't overstaff. In small rural areas, we know if you take an ambulance away from a certain jurisdiction, they may not have another one available. So if you don't need them, don't use them. That would be responsible use of resources. You know, generally operations is not unified, neither is logistics. When it comes to the operations level where you got the guy out there giving the actual tactic direction to those people on the ground getting the job done, and same with logistics. Now in operations, that could change. You may have more of a unified operations if you had a situation where you needed to, but typically or generally, that's not the case. It's always typically done at the command level, the incident command level, where you unify so you have a good filtered decision. Emergency Operations Center needs to know that unified command exists. That's important for them to know how the chain of communications is going to take place and how resource ordering is going to be done and defined in a timely manner. So if you have a streamlined process, you know, they call that the chimney approach. You don't want multiple chimneys coming from the scene feeding different information to the Emergency Operations Center about resources. You have to funnel that down to one chimney and let the smoke go up one chimney so it goes from one point. And that will make a much more efficient use in your objectives and the actual use of resources. And when it comes to incident command, you're familiar with ICS stuff. Again, there would only be one incident action plan. We're going to talk about a 201 document, which is the initial document in the ICS program. Then 202 is where you start listing out all your objectives and building your IEP and all those things. If you're in a multi-agency response scenario where you go past the first operational period, where you're going to build an incident action plan with the help of an incident management team, or you have the ability to do that individually with your new organization, then you're going to actually start moving forward with that. And there's only going to be one incident action plan or IEP, not multiples. Okay, we got another quick exercise here on exercise 3. You had an opportunity to look at the 3 different scenarios, the grain bin, the hazmat, and the tornado.